Welcome everyone to another episode of Politics Unleashed, where we talk about provincial matters. My name is Danny Haken, joined once again by our full cast with Jesse Watson.
Hey guys.
Chris Badeluck.
Afternoon.
And Michelle Badeluck.
Hey everyone.
And we are actually going to listen to, well, we always try to listen to our viewers, and this has been the number one request from several of you reaching out privately, the Notwithstanding Clause. So we're going to talk about the Notwithstanding Clause. We're going to talk about the legislation that has been put forth regarding the newest stuff from the UCP party on I want to get it right. Transgender assignment surgery for minors.
Gender affirming care.
Gender affirming care for minors. The trans women in sports.
Right.
And I guess, teacher striking. And the use of the clause in all cases. So I guess, Chris, being that you are a lawyer, tell us more about the Notwithstanding Clause.
Well, it's a part of the charter that was essential for the charter to actually come into being, because the premiers at the time, Lougheed and Blakeney in Saskatchewan, insisted that there be some sort of legislative override if they felt there was a bad court decision that could theoretically arise after the charter came into place. So essentially, while people keep saying, "Oh, it takes away our rights," I mean, the Notwithstanding Clause is an intrinsic and essential part of the charter ever having been passed into law. So the people saying this is somehow outside of our political norms to do this and it's some kind of imposition are entirely incorrect. I mean, there wouldn't be charter rights if there wasn't a Notwithstanding Clause. So I think the way that some people on the left approach this is just kind of crazy and ahistorical.
Yeah, I've seen many of them respond or say, like, I can't believe they're using this illegal procedure, or it must be illegal for them to do this, even though it's enshrined in the Constitution.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, there would be no charter if there wasn't a Notwithstanding Clause. You had multiple premiers say they would not have agreed to the charter if there wasn't this legislative override. And I think now we're seeing, as we have the judiciary kind of move farther and farther away from the reasonable stance they took in the 1980s.
Right.
That it was a very, very good idea that we included the Notwithstanding Clause, and arguably we should have made it even stronger, more broadly applicable. The decision in Toronto where a judge found that there was a charter right to a bike lane is probably the most emblematic instance of judicial overreach in recent memory that I can recall, because the absurdity of finding that people had a charter right to a freaking bike lane is just wild. I mean, it's dreaming in Technicolor, and it really turns the whole kind of charter interpretation process into a creative writing exercise.
So what are the limits of application to the Notwithstanding Clause? Like, what can't it be used for, or which is the smaller subject matter? What can and what can't?
Voting.
Well, I mean, there's enumerated parts of the charter which gives you a set of rights. However, those are kind of broadly defined categories. So those broadly defined categories essentially wind up meaning whatever judges want them to mean.
Okay. I
mean, you have a number of cases which offer you precedents as to what they're supposed to apply to. But what you really have over a period of 30 years is just a broadening application of all of these categories.
Yeah, I think everything but democracy point of view, right? Because they want to be able to, it didn't apply to the, I think, 3 sections or something. So you have to have an election, so you have the ability to change it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Change your government.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously legislation it can be applied to.
Yeah.
Right? But I've also heard some people online talk about, well, could it be used against judgments? Like, so for instance, what we're seeing in BC, right, with the fact that there are Indigenous bands that are now given claim over large swaths of the city or provincial lands, could the Notwithstanding Clause go, nope?
No, because that wasn't just the decision. The Cowichan decision wasn't decided on the basis of the charter. The problem they have in BC is essentially that, while in Alberta, all of the province essentially is covered by a series of different agreements with the Indigenous people, we have our treaties. And so you often hear when they do their land acknowledgements, we're on Treaty 6 or Treaty whatever, depending on where you are in the province. They don't have that for a large swath of British Columbia. So you have these land claims being kind of disputed even on an ongoing basis. So what they did was in BC, they had a claim on this area where this took place. I think it's Richmond, is where the Cowichan decision was concerning. This band was claiming these were their traditional lands, and you actually had two other bands disputing that it was actually this particular band's traditional lands and saying, no, this is our land, not their land. So it's not even like a really clearly defined sense of they had a long historical occupation of this territory. And essentially that decision came to be because of the fact that neither the British Columbia government or the federal government were prepared to go to court and argue that the land title system that governs all of the land ownership in Canada extinguished Aboriginal title. And they should have done that. It's the best argument, saying we started a government, now all land is owned by the Crown, right. And we've decided rather than having deeds or any other form of land ownership where you have to hold on to a physical piece of paper, we have a central registry, and the registry reigns supreme, so there's certainty in the buying and selling of land, because knowing who owns land is basically essential and the cornerstone of any free market economy. You have to be able to buy land to put a business or a factory or a farm so you can do whatever you want to do with that land. And the danger of that particular decision is it undermines our whole economic order. Like, who would want to buy land in that city now or in any part of BC? You'd be crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it's only going to get worse and expand. Yeah. So don't know where that ends. So then, if there's no limitation, there are certain limitations then on what the notwithstanding clause can be used on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of sections it doesn't apply to, but it has pretty broad application throughout the charter, because that's by design.
Okay.
But it basically lasts for 5 years, and then after that, you'd have to reenact it. Although some people obviously you have people trying to challenge Quebec's use of it, because Quebec has taken what I think is the correct approach to the notwithstanding clause. It's the Frank's Red Hot Sauce approach. They put that shit on everything. And Quebec will just annually reenact all of their notwithstanding clauses. It's almost just like a matter of course. Like, their French language laws are unconstitutional, but they're like, so what? We're doing it anyway. Here's our notwithstanding clause usage, and we're just going to continue to do that ad infinitum. So, I mean, the province of Alberta should look at copying that model, because it's not really as rare as people think it is. Mm-hmm. And when we have some of these kind of rogue judicial decisions, I mean, we can wait to see if you can appeal them to the Court of Appeal and then to the Supreme Court, and if they come to a sensible decision and resolve it that way. But often that can take you a series of, it could take 5 years before it ever works its way through various levels of court to see what the outcome is. And sometimes, I mean, that's the whole point of the legal challenges. Let's see how long we can tie it up in court. And then even if you get the government prevails in their policy direction, the government might be long gone.
Michelle, I guess a question for you. Why was this so important to enact in Alberta? I mean, I know you're a psychologist and you're...
Well, okay, so a lot of people, I think, okay, so we haven't really used the notwithstanding clause in quite some time. And in the news, we see Danielle Smith enacting this several times within arguably like a week and a half. And I think that's what's kind of taking people aback, because they're kind of seeing it as this routine policy or some sort of imposition on democracy. But all that it does is it's a defensive measure when courts are blocking our own autonomy as a province. And the notwithstanding clause being used for transgender, gender affirming care, and allowing transgender women to participate in female sports is very important, because minors can't consent to life-altering procedures. Their brains aren't fully developed. It's fundamentally wrong for us as a society to entertain that you can change your gender at the drop of a hat. That's not how things work. And when you take puberty blockers, they always tell you, oh, you can just pause puberty. If you want to continue, you can go off of them. Everything is reversible. This is all life-saving care. It's not. You can't just pause puberty. You're going to have people that are underdeveloped sexually, so they're going to be infertile. That's number one. Number two, it's not life-saving. After gender-affirming surgeries, you are 12 times more likely to kill yourself or self-harm. That's not life-saving. If that was a drug on the market, they would take it off immediately. 12 times, that's insane. That's an insane number. So we're so okay with just treating kids as some sort of sick science experiment. That's not okay. If you're an adult, I don't care what you do. You're an adult. You can make your own decisions. But to allow vulnerable kids and teens to make those kinds of decisions is insane. It's honestly, it's evil. It's unethical.
Like when I go online, all I see is we're taking away kids' rights. We're hurting kids. Like all these, Janice Irwin's up there right at the front, right? And so I feel a little bad when I read these things. Like I start to feel like I can't talk about it.
Right, because they'll villainize you and they throw every single label at you. You're a bigot, you're prejudiced, you're this, you're that. But there's nothing that's okay about telling a kid that they can mutilate their perfectly healthy body and for it to be okay. I mean, doctors are not really telling them about the repercussions of all of those procedures. Even if you don't get surgery, just taking hormones alone, you're doing irreversible damage. You're more likely to get osteoporosis, cancer, all kinds of issues within just a few years of taking those hormones. It's even worse for female transitioning to male because testosterone, I would argue, is far more powerful than estrogen and progesterone. Sure, if you were going the other way, you're going to have a little bit more of a feminine voice, but it's not going to be that obvious. Your breasts, obviously, they might enlarge. But if you're female transitioning to male, your voice, your bone structure, that's not reversible. And it's quite unfortunate because what we're seeing right now is a social contagion. Gender dysphoria is a real thing, but it does not occur at this proportionate rate. Like this is just overinflated numbers. It's not good. Also, when you look at statistics and just the amount of people identifying as trans, the trajectory is actually starting to dip. That doesn't really apply to any other mental disorder. So that's signifying that this is a social contagion. And you'll see that when a lot of parents will say, well, it's not just my kid that's transgender. All of their friends are transgender too. It's like a trend. Like these are the kids that would have been goths or punks back in the day, cutting themselves, wearing all black lipstick.
Were you goth?
No, I did have a brief punk phase when Avril Lavigne came out, but I don't want to talk about that, all right? But just imagine every single stupid decision you made as a teenager or a kid being permanent, haunting you today. And that's pretty much what we're asking society to abide by. And if you don't affirm these delusions, somehow you're a monster. If someone has schizophrenia, do we indulge them in that delusion? Yeah, that ghost you see in the corner of the room with bleeding eyes is real. No, we don't affirm that delusion. If you have body dysmorphia, you're actually not that muscular. You need to spend more time in the gym. And we're talking to like a 300-pound dude that's full of trenbolone and testosterone. No, we don't do that. When you're anorexic, do we say, yeah, you know what? We should give you a prescription of Ozempic. No! Why are we doing that? Instead, we should actually be working towards the root of the issue because most of those kids and teens, unfortunately, they do have other comorbid mental disorders in the majority of cases. They have ADHD, anxiety, autism, depression, bipolar disorder. You name it, it's usually happening, especially autism and ADHD. So when we're trying to tackle gender issues, what we really need to do is actually focus on the root of the issue. There's probably trauma involved, especially when you're not neurotypical. You have ADHD or you're autistic. You're already going to feel like an alien inside your body. Now you're going to add in puberty on top of that, where you already feel uncomfortable in your body. That's the perfect storm for feeling like, oh, maybe I was born in the wrong body. And there's also this theme of internalized homophobia. No, I'm not gay. I'm just born in the wrong body. No, you're probably gay, and that's okay. I don't want to mutilate your body. I want you to feel comfortable in your body so you can thrive as an individual. I want to tackle your issues. I want to work together with you to address your mental disorders and treat that instead of mutilating perfectly healthy body parts. Also, if you want to dress like what we as society call as a woman or as a man, go ahead. Dress however you want to dress. Just don't take those hormones. Don't take puberty blockers. Don't mutilate your body. I mean, look at New Zealand. They're a very progressive country, and even they just stopped Lupron, which is the puberty blockers, which, by the way, that's not their official usage. That's off-label they're using it. They used that initially to pretty much chemically castrate criminals. And now we're giving that to kids and saying that it's perfectly fine. And if you oppose this, then you're a monster. What?
So I guess the question is, and I see this, by the way, my background is in science psychology, right? Mm-hmm. But cognitive and behavioral. But I look at it like you have experts on one side of the aisle who say you shouldn't do these things. And of course you have the experts who have been the most vocal and given the most airtime, who are in favor of these changes and whatnot. So I guess what is the issue? Like you'll hear people say, well, trust the experts. Okay, well, if the experts are divided, who do you trust?
So here's the thing. When you're actually looking at research, most of them, they're being done by either they're being funded by pharmaceutical companies or by the universities themselves. And universities, in majority, they are leftist leaning. So they are already pushing this agenda. So pretty much if you want to get tenure, if you want to be safe in your program, then you're going to kind of pursue this leftist ideology. That's why Danielle Smith is bringing about that Jordan Peterson law or whatever it's called. Because as conservatives, we're shamed in academia, even when we present scientific evidence to back up our opinions. Like that study I just cited, that was done in 2024, last year. Jay Straub, you can look that up. It's on the internet, but they want to just silence people that are just stating the truth. Even when you look at brain scans, your brain is more likely to identify as the gender in which you were born into. That's a trans. So they keep saying that, oh, well, no, they actually think if you're a trans woman, yeah, I actually think more like a biological female. That's false. That's false. There's brain scans that actually show that. So if we just want to become better academics and better critical thinkers in general, we actually need to open up research for everyone to have an equal say and an equal opportunity, rather, to produce that kind of research. Because when you're trying to complete a dissertation in university, you have to go through IRB approvals. You have to make sure that everything is done ethically. Don't touch this subject. Don't touch that. Don't touch that population. So there's all of these blockades for us. And it kind of facilitates this weird environment where if you want to study something that's deemed as controversial, they'll silence you, and that's not really okay. Also, of course, most of the experts are going to go along with this. It's worth billions of dollars, okay? If you were to take the bread and butter of all these doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, yeah, you're going to get a pushback. Even when you look on Psychology Today, when you look up psychologists, most of them have their pronouns in their names. They have LGBTQIA plus whatever in there. So they're pushing this. When they see someone who has issues with their gender, they see dollar signs, unfortunately, because if you're looking at someone like that and there's obvious issues that are going on alongside that, those gender issues, yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's so complicated. It's unfortunate.
When this came out, you know, I was replying to some tweets or whatever, and there's a trans individual who lives near my coffee shop. And during the campaign, she called me a bully, called me a lot of different things, right? I'm a gay conservative. Like, you know, I'm just a guy living my life, right?
Yeah.
So I posted something, and she said that I was transphobic. Or they said, I guess, because I didn't check the pronouns in their Instagram profile.
Oh my God.
And then started to continuously post that I'm a transphobic person, blah, blah. It's like, how do you possibly reply to this? And then say you're knocking at the door. Say you're actually campaigning. Like, what the heck do you say to somebody at the door about this topic, honestly? Because it's like you're attacked hard, and
you are.
You know, your businesses are impact.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of funny because the whole LGBTQIA plus community, they originated from the gay activists, that all they wanted was equal rights. They just wanted to love who they wanted to love, get married, just be afforded all the same rights as heterosexual people. And somehow they've ruined everything that they fought for, and they've made it look like a circus, because this isn't what gay activists fought for at all. And when you push this kind of trans ideology the way that they are, you are pretty much trying to erase homosexuality and bisexuality by doing so, because you're saying, no, I'm actually not gay, I'm born in the wrong body. You are trying to erase homosexuality. And unlike transgenderism, homosexuality has actually existed since the beginning of time. I mean, my people we kind of capitalized on it. The Greeks, we were all gay. But it's an erasure of homosexuality. So these people, I would argue, are anti-gay. These are the most homophobic people ever, that they're pushing this kind of ideology, especially when they don't even take their own transgender evolution seriously. They're not actually transitioning in a meaningful way. You know, a lot of trans women, they'll just throw on a wig, or even that guy that he was in the Gold's Gym women's washroom in Los Angeles. He didn't even bother to put on a wig. He didn't even wear makeup. He had one dangly fucking earring. Are you fucking kidding me? If I can't clock it, honestly, I'm probably not even going to have an issue with it. Like if Blair White, for example, walked into my washroom, I'm not going to feel threatened. She actually took it seriously. See, I'm even calling her she, because when I look at her, that's a she, okay? But you see all these people that's, oh, I'm born in the wrong body. But they're not even trying. Like, guys, come on.
But when I go back to the notwithstanding clause, Chris, maybe you know this better than me, but like Smith keeps referring that this is what he would have done. But then you hear the other side saying that's not the intention of the spirit of it.
I mean, Lougheed made some statement. Well, the part of the problem with saying what would a historical figure have done is they never had the exact circumstances that we deal with today, because Lougheed always thought, well, we'd do it after we went through court, and then if the court decisions didn't work out the way we liked, then we'd use the notwithstanding clause. That was what he said. On the other hand, one of the two main premiers who advocated for it said, no, we'll just put it on and then it won't be in dispute anymore. That was Blakeney's position. So to a certain extent, you can see that Alberta lost at King's Bench, so that now they're bringing it in on the various pieces of trans legislation. So they're following that to a certain extent. Well, on the strike side, they've simply gone the Alan Blakeney route, I suppose, and just done it preemptively. But I think you can also say that some of these things are a little bit more unique than could be anticipated in the 1980s, because there was no right to strike in Canada until 2015. There were actually Supreme Court decisions in the 80s which said there wasn't a right to strike. Like, back to work legislation didn't require the notwithstanding clause even up till partway through 2015. It was only at that time that the Supreme Court said, we changed our mind. Our old precedents, which we're supposed to follow, are not something we're going to follow anymore. And now we're going to say there is a right to strike, because there never was up until that point. And in fact, the Supreme Court had specifically ruled against it. So we have this new situation which couldn't have actually been anticipated at the time, because when the Charter was coming into being, the right to strike didn't exist for the first almost 30 years of the Charter, and it's only really existed for about 9 years. So the unions essentially made a power grab, and now they're very angry that someone is trying to take it back from them.
I also want to just add, because I touched upon the gender affirming care for minors, but I didn't really talk about transgender participation in sports. Even after a trans woman has, or trans girl, I guess in this case, because we're talking about only minors, when they've taken estrogen, progesterone, puberty blockers for even several years, they still have a higher hand grip strength, just even like a punching force. Their joints are far more large and developed than females. Their muscle tissues, I mean, they've had so many years to benefit off of testosterone to develop that kind of muscle tissue. And even with estrogen and progesterone, you're still going to have a very, very significant advantage. So it's safety, right? We want to protect girls. Also, if you're a leftist and you're listening to this and you're like, well, that's just transphobic and whatever. So you're telling me then, at the end of the day, you're actually not a feminist and you're a misogynist, because you are tucking away biological females' reality and their safety, their well-being, and their identity, and pushing it aside for biological males. You guys are misogynists, like the biggest fucking misogynists out there.
I was going to say, there's one thing too. We have to consider, I think, two things. One is, should it really be necessary for the government to have to even use the notwithstanding clause for something like this? Because we see countries like New Zealand, the UK, Sweden, and Finland, who are all just democratic countries, and they're fairly left-leaning countries, have all brought in similar restrictions to what Alberta has done. And that was all deemed completely legal and well within the government's purview in all of those countries. But here in Canada, some judge essentially decided it was time to substitute her own interpretation of what the law should be allowed to do through the democratic process. So every time we have these judicial decisions overturning democratic laws, we're really undermining our democracy. And that's what people don't consider, that the notwithstanding clause is there to essentially provide a balance to. It is supposed to be the counterbalance to judges exceeding their authority and undermining our democracy. And it's supposed to help preserve the democratic franchise and the ability of the government to correct what they believe to be our bad decisions. And we're seeing some of those decisions which just seem to be bad. Like, for instance, the Supreme Court recently said that a minimum sentence of 1 year for possession and distribution of child pornography was something they could come up with a hypothetical of, which they found wouldn't warrant a 1 year prison sentence. So they were going to strike down the whole law as being invalid, despite the fact that the people in question didn't fit their hypothetical and in fact had hundreds and hundreds of videos and photographs of various pieces of child pornography. And we all agree child pornography is abhorrent and should be punished severely. So we have kind of this judicial thrust and kind of building case law in Canada, which is leading us to what are just bad societal outcomes, and that needs to be corrected, whether it's through the amendment of our Constitution or the more active use of the notwithstanding clause. The rebalancing of how our country operates on a legal basis has to be done in some way, shape, or form. And one other point I wanted to make before we move on is one thing we shall talked about all the negative effects of this, she didn't point out that when they say trust the science on these things, the actual study that kind of has grounded all of this expansion of transgender as treatments was a Dutch study, which had to be retracted and then reissued to show that there were as many negative outcomes from taking these treatments as positive ones.
Right.
And they didn't report that initially. So essentially what's being promoted is a treatment that's as likely to be detrimental to your mental health as offering any improvement. So how many of you would actually take a pill if you were told this pill is as likely to make you worse as better? I mean, that is a really bizarre treatment to be pushing for any of these people. And what they have found in long-term studies is that of children who claim they were born in the wrong body, 80% of them, if you just leave them alone,
Right.
will no longer have those symptoms by the time they get through puberty. They'll become accustomed to their body. I mean, the hormones of people going through their teenage years are very confusing, and especially for children who have other things that make them feel abnormal, whether it's autism or depression or anxiety or anything else. So we're essentially throwing them some snake oil, saying that here's something little will pretend will make you feel comfortable in your own body when it won't.
I mean, it's not even snake oil. This is a sick experiment with huge repercussions at this point.
Well, and also, so my argument for why we need to do more studies, and the fact that anyone pushing back, if we say we need to do more research, we need to actually find out what it is we're measuring, what are we actually doing, and anyone who pushes back on that says, "Oh, well, you're big at this,
Yep.
transphobe that." So in it's been a number of years, but in classical cognitive psychology, the system is sense, think, act. Imagine a box, 2 lines. The idea is you sense the world around you. Your brain takes that information, transforms it, and you act on it. But when we ask them where does the thinking take place, they just kind of shrug their shoulders and go, it's somewhere in there. Right? That was at the time I was taking these courses. My instructor said that's 70 years worth of classical thinking. That's the level they've reached is good enough, and they don't want to look any further into it. So if classical cognitive thought has essentially been it's in there somewhere and we're never going to find it and we're not even going to bother because whatever, it's in there, wash your hands of it. As we don't even, the reality is we don't even understand how our brains work, let alone now we're going to bring in trans identity and gender identity and say, well, the science is settled. We don't even understand how the lump of fat in our heads works, let alone to be able to understand how emotions work and identity works. So for people to push back on it and say, nope, we figured it out.
Well, and what we have figured out with brain scans, they've disproven the whole trans ideology altogether. That's the issue. And they're being silenced, which is not okay. It's not okay to treat people like experiments, and it's not okay to suppress the truth.
To switch gears, I'm curious your thoughts on this, at a municipal level. Like, we have, and I quote, a nonpartisan council elected, right? They all ran on a nonpartisan approach.
Yeah.
But 9 of them are hanging pride trans flags in their offices.
Right.
And then when the Notwithstanding came in, they all talked about the tragic event of today. They're all posting on their social media the result of this motion. Like, what duty do they have to actually, like, their role they play as a municipal leader? Why is this even in their scope of work? Because I found it really unsettling, right? Like, my elected official who's nonpartisan is making a statement how the bill is transphobic, right? And she's my elected official. Like, I find it alarming, actually.
Well, all the nonpartisan officials that you're referring to are really just NDP members who don't want to declare that they're NDP members.
And also, they've gone too far to support transgender rights and the trans ideology in general. They can't really backpedal because that's going to be very detrimental. And also, I mean, I can't even imagine the legal cases that are going to arise in the future when everything has been exposed. Like, there's so many lawsuits going on in other parts of the world for all of this stuff. So that's the thing. It's this cost-sunk fallacy. You've supported this messed up ideology because you were misinformed, right? You're misinformed, you've been supporting this, and now you can't backpedal because you've gone too far. Because if you admit that, hey, actually the research you're providing me is correct and I've been wrong this whole time, now you have to answer to all the people that you've messed up mentally, socially, and physically. That's a very, very big pill to swallow. These people can't even be held accountable for basic fiscal issues. Imagine something as detrimental as your own freaking health.
I was going to say that, sunk cost fallacy, that they've gone all in.
Yep.
They've hung their hat on this. This is what they're going to be about. And then they realize, ooh, might not have been right all along. Well, just keep going. It's I want to make a parallel that it's like no different than we saw in the federal election, where after a decade of being told, no, Jesse, this carbon tax is going to be great. You're going to make more money off the carbon tax than you're going to pay into it. And then during the election, they go, hey, we're going to get rid of the carbon tax. Hey, we're saving you more money because we got rid of the carbon tax. Well, for a decade, you were telling us this was the way it was until you realized you were going to lose everything because of it. So only now have you decided, okay, we got to change course.
See, and that's the issue. The government is preying on people's intelligence or lack thereof, I would say. And I hate to state it like that, but most people don't have a lot of critical thinking skills, and unfortunately schools have suppressed that because now it's turned into an echo chamber instead of promoting, Socratic thought. And that's a fundamental issue because we're not allowed to question things, we're not allowed to debate things. We just have to go along with the status quo and just push those ideologies out there. So
the thing is that while you say they double down and they'll never back away from it, it's not true. I mean, eventually they'll just pretend they never had anything to do with it.
Well, yes.
Because we see that with things like defund the police, which became so widely discredited when they tried it to any degree, whether in Canada or in the United States, and crime just skyrocketed. That people just backed away slowly and pretended they never said anything about that.
Well, I guess we're not at the point where they're going to back away.
Not yet. I mean, but going back to the Notwithstanding Clause, I'll raise something the U.S. Supreme Court asked. They essentially asked the people challenging the law when it was passed by a U.S. state, well, who is supposed to evaluate whether or not a experimental and novel course of medication or treatment is safe for the public to use, if not the government? And that's really what the government of Alberta is doing here. They're determining that it's not safe for children to go through an experimental and novel course of treatment. And they're essentially evaluating the science that's there and finding, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. There was a huge study in the UK. They found that people were just being given these medications with very cursory investigations and just almost allowed to prescribe themselves the treatment that they wanted. And that's not how any medical condition is supposed to be treated.
Right, and gender dysphoria, when someone actually displayed all of the symptoms in the DSM, or I guess the majority of them in order to be diagnosed with it, they had to undergo so much therapy. They had to transition socially over time. And after a significant period of time, then they were entertained with the option of going along with those procedures, taking hormones. Now it's a 15-minute doctor appointment. That's kind of messed up, especially when we're talking about kids and teens. How many of us, we had different kind of styles and phases? It's not a phase, Mom, but now we've made it permanent because of medicalization. That's not okay.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I grew up with any phases. I sure as hell didn't go goth or
punk.
Or punk. I mean, I really love my Weird Al music, and people are like, aren't you going to listen to like real bands or real music? I'm like, yeah, I like what I like. Whatever. My taste will change over time, as you can see by my record collection down there. It's like, yeah, I got Beatles, I got Journey, I got Joe Cocker, I've got Led Zeppelin and AC/DC. You'll figure it out in time. I want to actually bring up a question that, listening to everything we've discussed, why is it that people, and maybe it's just something unique to Canada, Alberta, whatever boundary you want to draw on this one, but why is it that, like, we pointed to countries in Europe, like the Scandinavian countries, which are, many people on the left will say, well, they're very socialist, even though they're not. They'll point out that they're free market economies, but that they found this out, they figured it out, and they're changing tact. So why is it that if Alberta or Canada want to do a thing, why is it that we constantly have to look at other countries as the leader in that, or fixing that? Like, why can't we just be why is it we always have to point to someone else and say, well, they're doing it, that's why it's okay for us to do it?
That's a good question, actually.
Because why can't we just be leaders and say, we're going to do this because we think it's the right thing, and then our opponents say, but no one else is doing it? Well, maybe no one else figured it out.
Well, it's almost never that they say no one else is doing it. They almost say, oh, what you're doing is just like the Americans. So
Right.
the counterpoint is, well, it's not just the Americans in this instance. It's New Zealand, it's the UK, it's Sweden, it's Finland, it's various other European countries are studying this and coming to the same conclusions that we are. And these are countries which have, what we normally think of as very progressive governments. This really shouldn't be a left or right thing. It should just be, this is what's safe for children. And it shouldn't even be really a political issue. It should be evidence-based. And the evidence for these treatments is really bad.
Right, that's the issue. We've politicized science way too much. It shouldn't exist in the same sphere as each other. They're two different things. But that's the problem. Because a lot of people, they don't like Donald Trump. I get it. He's not a career politician, and he says things off the cuff, kind of like how I do. And a lot of people, they don't like that. It rubs them the wrong way. So now everything we do, oh, you're just like Trump, oh, mega maple or whatever the hell. Maple mega.
It's intellectually lazy.
Right, it's stupid. It's just, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If we're talking about something that's scientific, let's just leave it with science and just not politicize the issue at all.
Yeah, but if you can't win the argument, it's easier to other the other side and say,
Right.
"Oh, well, you're a bigot, or you're a this phobe, or that is."
Right.
Instead of looking at the position of your argument and whether there's any flaws in it. So, for an example, like if I were to ask you, from 1950 to 1990, did things get more racist or less racist?
More racist.
From 1950 to 1990?
To 1990.
Yeah, so
Less
1950 to
less
1990.
racist, but 1990 to now, way more racist.
So that's the point, is that from
Yes.
1950 to 1990, you could say that societally things have shifted for
Yes.
the better, things improved.
Yeah.
But then from 1990 to today, have things gotten better or gotten worse?
Right.
And I think, look, America elected a black president for 2 terms.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, good, then, isn't that not turning a page? That as a society in North America, look what you've done. Racism is not extinguished, because it never will be, but you've made such strides.
Right.
And then Obama leaves and he goes, oh, he was campaigning with Biden, and he said, oh, this is the most, like, America's an incredibly racist nation. It's like, hold on, you just served 8 years, brother.
Right.
Like, what happened?
Because they don't want to be upfront, right? They don't want to tell the truth. It's your own policies that have crippled the majority of your population, and then they've been pushed to the other side. Because, yeah, like you said, in the 90s, things were far different than they are today. And most parties, I would argue, they were closer to the center than anything.
Yeah.
And now we have the Democrats and the Liberals in Canada. They are all the way to the left instead of being more centrist leaning. So people have been pushed to the Conservative Party, even though they've been lifelong liberals. So they've just changed their views so in such an extreme way that it's pushed away a lot of the population.
So, question. Does this help the NDPs or help the UCPs? Because, and then she's up there every day saying, oh, the next strike is going to be notwithstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help an election coming up in 2 years? Or is this a detriment?
It depends on where we're, looking at the polls, right? In rural areas, they still have their head on straight. They know what they're doing. They're going to vote Conservative because they've seen the effects of the crippling policies from the NDP. Unfortunately, I don't know what's wrong with city people. Over here, we just we love the left.
I honestly don't think it makes the UCP more or less likely to win one way or the other. I mean, the number of people who are very animated about the use of the Notwithstanding Clause, I would suspect is very, very limited to people who are very on Reddit or Instagram or some of these social media apps where they talk about it incessantly. I think what actually will determine the next election is whether the UCP is able to implement enough of their agenda
That's
that
right.
people actually start to see a change in things like healthcare and in education. And to that end, I mean, I saw an announcement that they're fast tracking 3 schools in Edmonton, 1 in Calgary, and 1 in Plamondon. So they are trying to do what I said last time. We need to actually get some things built. If you're promising a bunch of schools, let's see them.
Yeah.
You know, let's see some changes that are actually going to be visible and tangible to people. I think that's what the election is going to turn on more than whether or not the Conservatives sent the teachers back to work or whether or not they passed this legislation regarding transgender treatments.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Danielle just has to fix healthcare.
Yeah.
If she fixes healthcare and education, she's going to win next time. If she doesn't, no, she doesn't have a chance in hell.
Yeah. The major difference, obviously, between municipal politics and party or federal and provincial politics is that if your leader is electable and well-liked, you're electable and well-liked. And there could be some argument that individual MLAs or candidates could really try to outwork all of that and push. But really, it's if on the balance, if on the whole, did the government do more things right than it misstepped? Go
Right.
for it.
But Danny, you didn't answer the question.
Okay, give me the question one more time.
Using the notwithstanding, is this helping or is it gonna be a detriment?
No, because at the end of I don't think it'll be a detriment at all. Because at the end of the day, come election time, parents are going to be grateful that their kids are back in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think that on the legislation that was recently passed here, I don't even know if they're going to use it on the Jordan Peterson legislation that they passed or the Peterson law, whatever they want to call it. But parents are going to look at this and they're going to agree with it because, especially when I called into question the why is it that we have to look at other countries and say, well, they're doing it, why can't we? But show them like this is what the result of studies and science across the world has shown, that in fact we need to change our approach, and we're shielding it from any kind of court challenge because now is the time and we can't allow activist judges. I don't think this is going to affect the UCP at all. I think it'll be difficult at certain doors, but I'd like to think that so long as they get education and the healthcare thing sorted out, no, the UCP will be able to coast to another win, if not gain more seats, especially in Calgary and potentially some in Edmonton. But I don't think people are going to look at the Notwithstanding Clause and use that as a reason why not elect this government, right? Ontario has used it twice, Saskatchewan twice, Quebec has used it 17 times, and the Quebec government keeps getting elected. So,
I mean, the left does tend to make a lot of noise, and I could see how, especially the media, I mean, they're pushing all of this stuff out there. I can see how that can put a bitter taste in people's mouths when they're looking at Danielle Smith and her policies. But again, we need to just stop politicizing research and just general facts. If they find that transgender care, for example, it's actually saving lives, and that study that 12 times more likely to self-harm or kill themselves, that was not real, I'll support it. I mean, if you told me that there's no negative effects to taking hormones or gender-affirming care in general, I will support it. There's no reason not to then.
if the science backs it.
If the science backs it up. So just things should be more objective, especially when we're talking about science. So, yeah, it's just going to depend on what she does, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I suspect the next election will be the economy, healthcare, education, same as it always is.
Right.
And if she gets a pipeline like Rick Bell was suggesting this morning might be the case, I mean, obviously that'll really help the premier and show that all of her negotiating has been for something.
Yeah, and I know that next week is the UCP AGM, and so hopefully we'll get to talk to we'll actually be able to bring you, our listeners, some interviews from ministers and MLAs, and hopefully if they'll give us the time, and see if they'll share some thoughts with you and get the inside scoop. Any last comments or questions or words? No? All right.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I very much have sat on the sidelines for this one and listened. My name's Danny Hakinen.
Jesse Watson.
Chris Badalek.
Michelle Badalek.
Thank you, everyone, for another episode of Politics Unleashed podcast. Glad you stuck around.